Hi, everyone. We're going to talk about Chapter 2, Ethics. We introduced this at the end of Chapter 1. We're going to talk about ethics and actually social responsibility in Chapter 2 here. And I'm going to go ahead and start off our presentation here. So let me go ahead and start the slideshow. Okay, so business ethics and social responsibility. Those are actually not exactly the same thing. So we're going to differentiate between the two here. Let's start off with the idea that acceptable business behavior is determined by the organization. It's very important that an organization sets the tone and has a good reputation and setup for ethical behavior. That includes all the stakeholders, customers, suppliers, competitors, government regulators, interest groups, and the public. It's important that you have that ethical set of standards for all of the stakeholders. And this can be determined somewhat by the culture of the organization, as well as an individual's personal principles and values. So in essence, an organization's culture will influence its ethical behavior. So again, we will differentiate between ethics and social responsibility, concentrating on ethics first. There is a video here on social responsibility. I'd like you to view that on your own. This is really good in helping to differentiate for us what exactly social responsibility is in comparison with ethics. But in general, social responsibility is the business's obligation to maximize its positive impact on society as a whole, really, and minimize its negative impact on society. You know, this could be anywhere from making sure you're not polluting the environment to making sure you're paying fair wages. Those are some of the examples there. So they do differ, the social responsibility, versus ethics. All right, ethics then are the decisions made by an individual or work group, kind of like what we talked about in the last slide there, that a society is going to evaluate as right or wrong. It is a little bit different than the law, because just because something is not against the law does not mean it's ethical. So that is a little bit different. And then social responsibility is the impact of the entire organization's activities on society versus it being decisions made. It's the actual activities. So let's move back to ethics again here. Society's judgment directly affects an organization's ability to achieve its goals. It's important that a business be socially responsible, not only to make the world a better place, for lack of better words, but it's also going to affect its image in society as well. Okay. And again, many firms are going to be recognized when they act ethically or socially responsible, and it's going to impact them negatively if they do not. I talked about legal and ethical issues. Again, just because something is legal doesn't necessarily mean it's ethical. And so that can, evolve into disputes. But again, business ethics go beyond legal issues. There's the law, and this is what's against the law or not. But just because something isn't against the law doesn't always mean that it's something that you should do, that should be ethical. And this is not limited to for-profit organizations. And really this whole class as a whole. While we talk about business in this class, most of our topics can relate to nonprofit organizations and governmental organizations as well. All right, so I wanted to highlight one huge ethical dilemma in business today, which is misuse of company time. And this has a person on social media and online shopping. I know I'm a bit older, and when I got my first job, we still had dial-up internet at home. And when we got to work, we had the faster internet, and it was very tempting to search on social media, or not social media, sorry, internet, and online shopping was really tempting. Nowadays, it's very tempting to, surf your social media on your phone or look at your text messages, those kind of things. It's important to note that, well, an occasional looking at your messages is fine. This is a big area where people are misusing company time and spending way too much time on internet and social media. So I just wanted to highlight that. That's a current ethical dilemma in the workplace today. I know that as a manager at my last job, it was very hard because how much social media use is too much. People do deserve breaks and do need to check their messages. So again, it's kind of a gray area at times. Okay, so again, it's hard to sometimes always recognize an ethical issue. I mean, some things are very obvious, but other things you're like, well, but an ethical issue is an identifiable problem, situation, or opportunity that requires a person to choose from among several actions that may be evaluated as right, wrong, ethical, or unethical. So an example of one would be bribery. That's where there's payments, gifts, or special favors intended to influence the outcome of a decision. As a general rule, bribes are considered unethical, but there could be an exception where they were not. Another ethical issue could be abusive and intimidating behavior. If people are bullying people, for instance, in the workforce, that's not illegal necessarily, but it is not ethical to be bullying and abusive verbally at the workplace. And this is actually the most common ethical problem for employees. It usually is, employees not getting along. One of them, is maybe jealous and trying to get the other person in trouble, or intimidating the other person. This could include physical threats. That I don't know that physical threats happen as much as things like false accusations. Oh, so-and-so did it. It could also involve profanity, insults, yelling, even, giving someone the silent treatment or ignoring someone. It's very difficult to assess and manage because different people have different views on what they consider intimidating. People have different personalities. The intent must be considered. Maybe they were just misunderstood. But again, bullying is associated with a hostile workplace. And I've definitely worked in jobs where bullying was there. And I know that for me, it ultimately led to me being very dissatisfied at my job. And especially when I was younger, I went through a couple of different jobs pretty quickly because of it. So rather than bring it to the manager, I just decided to move on to another job. In hindsight, I should have brought it to the manager. Just going to another job isn't a solution. All right. We talked about misuse of company resources. One example would be if you're using the internet on your computer all the time, if you went and ran off 250 flyers, for your kids' baseball fundraiser, that might be considered misuse of company resources as well. It's excessive time on, say, personal emails, or if you were putting personal expenses on a company report, like you went out to eat with your friend and you put it on a expense report. And I talked about the copier. Usually running 1 or 2 copies of something personal is usually fine, but it's when it gets excessive. Same thing with the phone calls or the emails. If it's just a quick, like I have to email my kid's teacher because they had a question or something, is way different than answering 20 emails. Or, when you're doing that on your lunch time, that's different than when you're doing it during your work time. Many companies are implementing official policies regarding these things, because then it just isn't like, well, how come so-and-so could use the copier, but not me? That's what I ran into my work. Well, how come it's okay for them to use their phone, but not me? And it was very hard to say, well, because you spent, 3 hours today on Candy Crush and they only spent 10 minutes. It's very hard unless I sat with a stopwatch. They just see that this other person also used their phone. So, if you have a specific policy, such as you can only use your phone at break time, or, things like that, it can help make more consistency. Thus, employees are going to see it as a fairer policy, and you're going to see less misuse and abuse of company time. I know at my last workplace, it was very hard because the owner always texted us and such. And so we kind of needed to have our phone on our desk. And so when you set those policies, you got to keep stuff like that in mind, that if you're going to expect your employee to have their cell phone on them at all times, and maybe even answering company calls, that it's going to be a little harder to make those concrete policies. All right, so other ethical issues that could happen is conflict of interest. That's when maybe they have a personal interest that maybe isn't in the business's best interest, so they might try to advance their personal interests instead of the business, or and so that's a conflict of interest. So in order to avoid that, you need to separate your financial interests. So for instance, let's say you own stock in the competing company of the one you work for. Well, maybe you want your stock to do well, so you don't care if your own company does as well. That's a conflict of interest. And so you want to make sure you're keeping that separate so you don't have that. Another example of a conflict of interest is insider trading. That is what Martha Stewart went to jail for. That meant that she had insider information that other general public did not have information about when she bought and sold stock. And thus she was able to buy it at lower prices or sell it at higher prices than the general public, because she had internal information, and that was not public. And that's called insider trading, and that's not legal. Okay, so let's look at another ethical dilemma here. You are an account manager and forgot to submit a purchase order last week for Lotzido Construction, your largest client. Uh-oh. The company's administrative assistant, Hizo, calls to check on the status of the order. What do you do? Uh-oh. Do you apologize for your lapse in memory and immediately place the order? B, do you let Hizo know the order is on its way and charge a significant sum of money to overhead in order to have it expedited? Letter C, explain that your department manager has not yet authorized the purchase order, but is expected to do so this afternoon. Or letter D, apologize to the customer for the delay and explain that the requested items are back ordered and will not be received for another 2 weeks. Okay, so first off here, you can see the dilemma. It's your best customer, you messed up. It's so easy to just lie and blame it on, say letter D, which is a back order, or letter C, blaming it on your your department manager. So letter C and D are basically out and out lies. So those are technically unethical, even though it seems really easy to just use those. Who's ever going to find out? Well, you never know. That customer might be friends with your department manager, so it's always, honesty is always the best policy. So C and D are basically lying. Letter B here is not ethical, because you're charging a client for something that is your fault. And so that is also not ethical. So the answer here would be letter A. You simply have to apologize for your lapse in memory and immediately place the order and say it will get to you as soon as possible. Now, if they need it expedited, that's when you may have to say, decide, are you going to talk to your boss and have the company eat the cost, and see what you can do. in order to keep the client, because charging the client the expedited shipping will likely, could likely cost you a customer. Okay, so that's an ethical dilemma there, an example. When we look at those, you need to look at what's fair, what's honest. In this case, we were, letter C and D were not honest, letter B was not fair, letter A was the best option. When you're looking at ethics, it goes into other things, other situations, for example, communications. When you're marketing a product, you can't have false and misleading advertising. Before I worked full-time at Clatsop, I taught online for a for-profit private university, and they actually had a big lawsuit against them that they lost for false and misleading advertising, because they had said that, I don't know, there was some percentage of their graduates getting jobs after graduation, and it was inaccurate. So it was false, and they were able to prove it false. So in that sense, they were misleading in their advertising, and likely when they signed up students, they may have been deceptive in their selling tactics. And so the for-profit universities especially have been sued a lot over this, because they, in the name of profit, have tried to sell their degrees for unrealistic expectations sometimes. And again, their tuition is very high, so you had to give these very high expectations. This could also be in the product labeling. You have a product and it says what it does. If you say it's a cure for something and it really isn't. Some other things to look at are your business relationships. It's your responsibility to keep company secrets. You should not be spilling those to other people. You need to be meeting your obligations and responsibilities. Like in that last scenario, you had not met your obligation there. And avoid undue pressure forcing others to act unethically as well. And then another one is plagiarism. That's where you would copy the work of another. That happens a lot in the workplace as well, where someone might take credit for someone else's work. All right, so when you make decisions about ethical issues, just some things to think about. One is, first off, think to yourself, is it legal? Are there potential legal restrictions or violations? If it's illegal, then that kind of, answers you there that it's likely not ethical either. Does your company have specific code of ethics or policy on that action? Hey, that'll help answer it right away. I know at the last company I had, we tried to make some more specific policies, because people were very interpreting the rules kind of widely. And I thought, if we had a little more specifics, like, our vacation policy, can you carry your vacation to next year? And then some people were like, well, I want to cash it out. We needed to have a policy like, no, you cannot cash it out and be carried forward. Different people got different answers. So then all of a sudden it was like, well, why did Joe get this and not, Carla? So having a specific code of ethics or policies can help. Is this activity customary in your industry? So specific to your business or industry. Are there trade groups that have guidelines and or codes of ethics that address this issue? I know for me, I'm part of the American Institute of CPAs, or Certified Public Accountants, and they have some guidelines and codes of conduct that we follow. Would this activity be accepted by your coworkers? By that we mean, what would they think? Would they think it's okay or acceptable? If you were to discuss this with others, how would they feel? How would your manager feel? And then again, how does this fit within your own beliefs and values as well? All right, so these are some questions to ask yourself if you get yourself into an ethical dilemma. In the next week of our course, our discussion, we are covering chapters 2 and 3. And so the discussion in week 2 is going to have you consider 4 different ethical dilemmas And you are going to choose a solution to that dilemma from the given options, kind of like we just did the example in a couple slides ago. And when you pick your solution to that, consider these questions and give your reasoning as to why you picked that solution. Again, this will be in the week 2 discussion question. So I'm just going to click through these, but there will be 4 questions you can choose from, and each one is an ethical dilemma. You need to pick a solution, and then you need to write a couple of sentences as to why you picked that solution. And again, those questions to consider are some things you can consider when coming up with a reasoning as to which solution you picked. So there will be 4 different ethical dilemmas you can choose from, and this will be next week. So I'm going to go ahead and click through those now because you will get a chance to look at those for next week's discussion. All right, so how do we improve ethical behavior in business? There's a couple of key factors there. You're looking at your individual moral standards and values, and those are kind of set within the individual. But there's also influence of managers and coworkers. And if your overall culture and business environment and influence can influence whether people will act in a more ethical manner or not. And with number 3 there, the opportunity to engage in misconduct. If you have very little oversight, there's obviously going to be a little bit more opportunity, let's say, to misuse company time. And so you have to look at those things to try and improve ethical behavior, is to limit opportunities to act unethically and to make sure that your company culture and environment and influence is that of an ethical environment. One way to do that is to have a code of ethics. And then just a topic to bring up here is what's called whistleblowing. And that's when, if somebody does tell on a company for being unethical, or potentially maybe even a coworker, but whistleblowing particularly is usually when you get, let's say, fired in retaliation for telling on misdeeds by a company. So that is not actually a way to improve. Well, I guess it is. It's a way to improve ethical behavior because there's whistleblowing protection. So if your company fires you for, let's say, turning them into OSHA for unsafe work conditions, that can be considered whistleblowing, and your company can get in trouble, or you potentially might get your job back, things like that. So there are some protections for workers if you need to pretty much tell on a company. All right, so let's go to social responsibility. So we've talked about ethics and how we make some ethical decisions, how we can try to improve ethics in the workplace. Social responsibility, a company that finds this important will likely also have a higher standards of ethics at their company. Social responsibility, we can start with corporate citizenship. So for example, companies introducing eco-friendly products, your company has a goal to not pollute the environment, to the best extent they can. So one example would be to introduce eco-friendly products. One thing I've seen motels do is they'll encourage customers to, to hang their towels back up and not have them washed every time when they're staying multiple nights. And so that's an example there. Social responsibility issues, again, we've got relations with owners and stockholders. And with that, some issues that can come up. One is that they need to make sure they maintain proper accounting procedures, accounting for, well, really accounting in the business as a whole, and provide investors with all relevant information. So part of social responsibility, we all want to, have a socially responsible business and do good for society, but you do also have a role in making sure that you're protecting the owner's rights and investments in the business and um, the goal of being profitable. Now, a business, in order to be profitable, doesn't mean it can't also be socially responsible, but you do need to make sure you weigh those out. All right, and for this, there's an example here in this video, and I'd like you to go ahead and play that when you're reviewing this chapter. All right, some other social responsibility issues. We've got employee relations. Not only do we want to be, good on the environment, but you also want to be socially responsible in providing a safe workplace, paying your employees a fair and adequate wage, fair and adequate benefits, keeping your employees informed about what is happening in their company. A lot of companies I've worked for, they had, monthly employee meetings, and that was a good chance to keep employees informed of what was going on. I know at the college here, we have at least one big meeting at the beginning of the year, and, we talk about how's our enrollment and, how's our funding looking and, how are things going right at the beginning. So we kind of all have an idea of what's going on. Also listening to, when they have problems coming up and making sure that you're not showing favoritism and treating them fairly, providing equal opportunities for promotions and raises across the company. So those are just some examples there. Some other things to think about, not only your employees, but your consumers. Consumers have rights too. They have a right to have a safe product, to be properly informed about the product, a right to choose their product, a right to be, heard as well. And all of that's within John F. Kennedy's 1962 Consumer Bill of Rights. Sustainability issues. We talked a little bit about this, but you need to make sure that your company is sustainable. You can't just pollute all you want, and that includes water, air, land. I worked at a seafood processing company, and they had water outtake after their processing. They had to make sure they weren't polluting the bay that they were offshooting their wastewater into. There were standards they needed to keep in making sure that that wastewater was properly not polluting the water source there. And so that is an environmental issue. As I was talking about, some businesses are now getting more into recycling or trying to, reuse the towels and be more green that way. Those are all examples of companies trying to be socially responsible. Another big one that I see in our community is community relations, where the businesses want to make their communities a better place for everyone to live and work. Some examples there are that Home Depot has had their employees volunteer for different organizations. I believe one of them was helping to build a playground at Gerhardt Elementary School. Walmart has donated most of the contents to food baskets for Thanksgiving to those in need in Warrenton. That's just one example of what they've done. And so there's many businesses, really as part of their social responsibility should be doing some of these things, as they have the financial ability to do them. And so a lot of them will donate monetary or products to local and national organizations. As I said, Home Depot donates a little bit of their employees' time. I know there's some other companies, I believe Craft 3 is one of them, that allows employees to do charitable work as part of their work time. All right, so social responsibility requirements. I'm just going to present to you this chart here. This is in your text as well. but it shows Starbucks as an example, and it's showing some different examples there of financial and economic viability, compliance with legal requirements, ethics, and philanthropic activities. So these are their examples of their company specific social responsibility, their plan to be socially responsible in these different ways. All right, so let's look at another example here where a company is debating their social responsibility dilemma here. You are a member of a 5-person executive committee debating whether to install solar panels at your facility, need more manufacturing. It will be a significant capital expenditure for your company, which is facing a workforce strike due to stagnant wages and paltry benefits. 2 committee members believe this will raise morale and ingratiate need more manufacturing with the local community. The other 2 members believe these financial resources could be put to better use. You are the swing vote. How will you vote and justify your decision? So A, yes, community support is vitally important to the long-term success of need more manufacturing. B, no, the funds should instead go to increasing employees' pay and benefits. C, yes, solar panels will decrease need more manufacturers' environmental footprint. And D, no, it is not worth the cost since the power generation is dependent on the weather and cloudy skies and winter will decrease the amount of sunlight received. I'm going to tell you that for me, I would pick B or C to be socially responsible because C, we are decreasing our environmental footprint, but B, depending on where your employees pay rates are, this might be necessary to increase their pay, to keep, you're socially responsible to be paying your employees fair wages and benefits. So I think this would just depend on, where your employees are at. All right, and we'll end with this last social dilemma where we had Checkers Pizza. And they implemented a strategy to try and beat the competition where they developed a computerized information database to make Checkers the most efficient competitor and provide insight into consumer buying behavior. So pretty much they were collecting information about their customers. And if customers called in, their address and previous order information was coming up on the computer. After 3 months, the founder wanted to give an award to the family that ate the most pizzas. Sounds cool. And but then he started thinking, well, maybe they don't appreciate that we're collecting all this information about them. Maybe they don't want the attention saying, hey, this person bought all these pizzas. And so, there's some ethical issues here with collecting that information. Should you be notifying them first? That would be a yes. I would notify the winner first before going public. And then you probably should also be notifying the customers that, you are saving some of their information for future use. Do you see this as a potential violation of privacy? It is if you're not telling them you're collecting the information. That's what I'm going to say. And you potentially could have a customer that feels that way and then doesn't order from you. So it's something to keep in mind. And so how you would handle the situation, again, we kind of talked about that. For me, I would have told the customer up front that we were collecting the information, and then our winner, I would have notified them and said, is it okay if we go public with this? All right, so that is our chapter 2 presentation. In our next week of class, you will have that social dilemma discussion and cover chapter 3.